Hello everyone, this is Paula Marie Young, award-winning mediator and legal educator whose purpose is to teach people negotiation and mediation skills so they can live happier lives, solve problems more effectively, and resolve conflict holistically with wisdom, skill, and heart. So we just finished talking about the agenda setting stage in the process. And one thing I wanted to mention was just the mechanics. So you've developed the list of interest. You've checked in with the parties to make sure you've captured everything. You've then converted those lists of interests into how can we agenda items. And you've transferred each one of those onto a separate piece of flip chart paper. And then you draw a line underneath it. And that creates the space for the parties to start generating options. And so if you have 6 issues, you're going to have 6 separate pages. And you're going to put those around the room so that the parties can see them and then begin to exercise their choice about which one they're going to do first, second, third, and so on. All right, so we've done that. Now we're shifting into the option generation stage. And as part of that, we're certainly trying to generate movement forward. We're trying to get parties to move off their positions. And by beginning to see the options that can be implemented, they begin to do that. The textbook authors will put that in the context of a specific type of persuasion, and we'll get to that later. It certainly is the tool that I use most frequently, but I recognize that these other things are going on. So let me get my PowerPoint so we can talk about this more specifically. Alrighty, here we go. So generating movement through problem solving and persuasion. So the readings cover a big chunk of Chapter 9 and a small chapter, part of Chapter 12. You'll just take a look at what's in the materials. The one thing I want to point out is that the ground rules for brainstorming are going to be under your tools section, and this is something that you'll want to put into your mediation binder. Then I've included a number of resources on evaluation and mediation, if that's the style you're going to adopt. This material is designed to help you develop best practices. We will be looking at a couple of videos, which I'll talk about in just a minute, and then I want to review the style diagram that you likely created when you were evaluating mediator styles for Craig Lord and Cutrona. All right, so there are video tracks, a number of video tracks that I want you to watch that are online associated with the textbook. They're all, I think, interesting. You're going to enjoy watching them. And then I've got 2 more videos I want you to watch, and I just want to caution you that these links were the old links, and the Hamlin is now redeveloping their website. So I will have to perhaps find alternative ways to get to this, but I'll make sure that you have access to these. And this gentleman is Jim Coben, and he is behind this huge project where he looked at and analyzed and wrote about all the cases, the litigated cases involving mediation and the sort of problems that arise post-mediation. And as part of that, he developed these videos that are based on these cases and can be used in a number of ways when you're trying to do trainings. All right, you are going to have your student role play and cross v rope, and so you'll be taking the list of issues or interests, and you will find those in the course materials for the last class as part of your reframing materials. And we're going to have your iterations of the how can we, and so when you practice this, you'll transfer those to post-it note sheets and then work with your parties to generate options to each of those. And then we will do a debriefing of the video clips and your role play experiences in the Google Hangout. All right, the first topic, persuasion and mediation. So the textbook authors describe two things, persuasion and problem solving, and they define persuasion as something that should not be heavy-handed or done in inappropriate ways. So this is an effort on their part to acknowledge and respect party self-determination and to a great extent preserving mediator impartiality. They suggest that you approach it with a servant's mindset or a service mindset. And it's defined as an attempt to alter another person's attitudes or actions, and they say it's a highly interactive process. Problem solving describes a process that pierces the parties' positions so that each side's interests, priorities, and constraints can be understood, develops a variety of potential solutions to the issues confronting the parties, and examines how well those solutions meet or do not meet the parties' interests compared to their available options, which, as we know from Module 3, are thatness and whatness. So, in terms of effective persuasion, they give more of a conceptual overview. And they say that in terms of the messenger, personal credibility matters. So to the extent that the mediator is the persuader, then you have to understand that that is relational as well as substantive. And establishing credibility early in the mediation provides a foundation for persuasion later on. And they say two things are key, likability and authoritativeness. And, you know, the likability thing is so interesting because there's lots of research on this, that people just have an affinity with people that they like. And unfortunately, that's usually because they're a lot like you. So we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute. All right, the message. Logic, data, and evidence matter. So people need good information to help them assess whether a new course of action yields benefits that outweigh the disadvantages. So I've talked about creating that imaginary information box and supporting the introduction of information so that people can make informed decisions later on. When we talk about party self-determination, one of the key characteristics is creating a way in which people can make high-quality, informed decisions. The role of feelings in persuasion. So their recommendation, as is mine, is it's good to generate positive emotions at this stage in the process. So optimism, hope, certainly appropriate, humor. It's okay to flatter people in the forms of puppy pats. You want to be even-handed in it. You may want to be more generalized. You guys are both doing such a good job at this. Pride, perhaps in something that they're talking about, or I don't know. I'll have to look at that again. So you will want to refer to the emotions list in Class 18 materials just to keep this in mind, and this is something, that list is something that should go into your mediation binder. At the same time, appealing to some negative emotions can work too. Fear about what might happen in the future, anxiety about the situation, even guilt. The importance of reciprocity. So it works because people find it disagreeable to be in a state of indebtedness. And again, there's a lot of psychological research about this. I think it boils down to the fact that we're just such highly sociable animals that we really do respect the need to balance favors and be in balance in terms of our responsibilities and obligations to people. And one of the things about people in conflict is they're out of balance in that respect, right? And so I do think that we can, one of the things that we're trying to do is to get them back in balance, get them to feel more of a good person, because they've often made a contribution to this that they may not be willing to own up to, but it's put them out of balance. And the mediator can use the norm to urge a party to make more meaningful concessions. So, you noticed in the silent negotiation, when your concession was not reciprocated, how upset that made you. And so when we're helping parties negotiate, we want to be able, for instance, through role reversal or something, to help them understand how a concession that's not reciprocal is going to be received by the other side. Consistency and commitment. I don't know if you're familiar with the writings of Robert, I guess it's Cialdini, and he is a very well-respected psychologist, academic psychologist, as I understand. And according to him, all human beings have a desire to be perceived by others as acting consistently. So again, I guess as social beings, you want to make sure you can predict what everybody around you is going to be doing. So a mediator in an early stage of the process, even in the orientation, can ask or get a commitment, are you here today to resolve this problem, if possible? And then later use that commitment to get people to act consistently with it. So the example that the book gives is, I wonder how this position squares with your earlier statements that both parents should have quality time with their kids. So you can see if somebody's put out a position or a proposal that says that the mom's going to have the kids all through the weeks and the dad is only going to have them on the weekend, you can test that through this and have them reevaluate whether that's consistent with some position that they've taken earlier. This is the book that he's probably most well known for, and I've read it. It's really very good, and I've seen him speak at one of the ADR conferences, and it's very powerful information. So one of the things that he talks about is scarcity as a persuasion tool. And opportunities become more valuable to us when their availability seems limited. And why is this? When people feel that they are losing an opportunity, they fear they are losing part of their autonomy as human beings. So certainly in consumer marketing, we often see limited qualities, on the shopping networks. They'll have a flashing indicator that shows you how many things are left. And when you are advertising a webinar, for instance, you might mention that the time frame to sign up is closing in, or you only have 2 slots available, or whatever it might be. Okay, why negotiators? This is why negotiators use exploding offers, and this is something that I would talk more about. It's really a topic, it's a separate topic on, again, the psychology of negotiation and the mental shortcuts that people take and hard bargaining tactics. And so exploding offers are taking advantage of at least perceived scarcity. And why mediators set deadlines, emphasizing the now or never nature of mediation in the later stages of the process. Okay, setting the table for persuasion, conditioning the parties. So your textbook authors say that persuasion and mediation requires a slow, subtle changes in viewpoints. And the mediator will experience resistance in people's shifts in this way. So the mediator really needs to condition the parties for this later work in a number of ways. So one way to do it is creating a seize-the-day atmosphere, that this is a unique and possibly final opportunity. And that's something that you could say in your orientation, or perhaps when you're beginning to move out of agenda into option generation. Just remind people the opportunity that they have. Getting an early commitment from the parties to put this dispute behind them. So again, that's also going to set up that consistency persuasion technique later on when they aren't moving in a direction that would put it behind them. So there's a video clip, and it shows a mediator's opening orientation in the personal injury case in which the mediator does some of this work. You may also want to establish deadlines. So those externally set are more motivating, especially if a trial date is looming, but you can also set them internally as the mediator. And an example is, I'll end the mediation by 4 p.m. if we cannot make substantial progress by then. So it comes with risks, because then you have to either, if the parties are getting close and that timeline's coming, but they still need a little more time, then you have to figure out what you're going to say given the fact that you've set that deadline. And, you know, one thing might be, you know, when I set that deadline earlier, I really wasn't sure that we were going to be able to resolve things today, but you've been making such incredible progress. I'd like to extend the deadline 1 more hour. How do you feel about that? And then, again, it may actually enhance the sense of urgency. Another thing you want to do is build intimacy and rapport, because then when you're trying to persuade, people are going to be more trusting, right? Because you built a relationship of understanding, empathy, and trust. And you're using your communications to do this, especially all those early paraphrasings that are capturing content, emotion, and deeper meaning. You want to engage in small talk to identify similarities, shared interests, or experiences. So you can do this before the mediation even starts in your pre-mediation contacts. This is really important because it does demonstrate interest in the disputants in their lives, and it also enhances likability. So if you're showing that you share an interest, and there's a story about, I'm going to forget his name now, but he was involved in negotiating the Irish peace accords. And at one point when the parties were completely at impasse, he just called sort of a recess, and he asked the parties to start talking about the things that they like to do outside of the negotiating room, things that they do as hobbies, or things that they participate in because they're interesting to them. And surprisingly, they found out that there were a lot of people that had an interest in classical music, I think it was. And after that conversation, the tone changed when they got back into the negotiations, and people started making more concessions because I guess they could see each other's humanity. They realized they weren't that different in many ways, and perhaps they were reminded that there were other things in life that they wanted to pursue other than either those negotiations or the ongoing conflict. One of the things you can do is ask questions about how the process is working for each party, and there's some examples in the book. And basically, again, you're doing that, you're building that rapport and that empathy and that trust. And so the authors say it helps convey that you are here to help and that you can be trusted and you should confide in me. So there is a video clip, and these are the questions associated with it. How do the mediators create intimacy and rapport? Do all of these interventions seem sincere? If you were the party, would you find them persuasive? As a mediator, are there any you would not feel comfortable employing yourself? Could you see yourself trying to connect in these ways with a party you mistrusted or found offensive? On that last question, I think, again, it just helps to try and maintain this open heart that appreciates that even these folks that you don't find agreeable are acting rationally in their own minds and are probably trying to do the best that they can under the circumstances. And one of our jobs is to get them more balanced, get them more flat-footed, and get them acting in a way that is closer to their true selves, to their highest intention. So I have an easier time with that by constantly reminding myself of that. I think, pay attention to how Lord tries to establish intimacy. And part of this is he's in a small claims mediation. There's not a lot of opportunity to do it, but, be mindful of it. Just be mindful of it. When you're conditioning the parties, you want to be sure to be conversing and not preaching. Again, this is, what's the power distance? What's the role you're really playing? Inviting, not telling. And use explore with me questions and feeling questions. And there's a number of examples on page 235 of the text. Other ways that you can connect with the parties, and you usually have to do this in caucus because clearly it can be perceived as being partial to a party. And in fact, you're probably going to do it in one room and then go to the next room and do a lot of the same things with the other party. Protector, coach, ally, admirer, advocate. And there is one mediator, there's a couple of clips where he physically moves to align himself on the same side of the table in caucus with the plaintiff's lawyer and the plaintiff. I think it's a little clumsy the way he does it, but I understand what his intention is. This is interesting. Parties apparently expect the mediator to wield an authoritative voice before they are willing to be persuaded. Now that makes some sense. It's kind of odd because we really don't have any control over the outcome, but in order to help them make shifts, they have to feel like maybe we are slightly one up by experience or training. So they suggest that depending on your style, you're going to be doing this in a slightly different way. So for evaluative mediators, you're going to talk about your experience as a litigator in similar cases. You're going to trumpet past successes in resolving similar disputes. And in this area, you often see mediators advertising their settlement rates. And we'll talk about this later in terms of the ethical issues that it raises. But you can see why people want to do it, even if they don't understand exactly what they're doing. Confidently predict how a court would decide the case. This is assumes that it's allowed by your ethics rules, and in most states you can't do a specific prediction. You might be able to do some sort of range prediction. For facilitative mediators, you're going to be emphasizing your mediation experience and training. So how many mediations have you conducted? How many hours of training have you accrued? And one of the things that you're going to want to do when you get done with this course is figure out how many hours you've actually invested in this. Even though it's billed as a 40-hour program, obviously with the webinars and our Google Hangouts and the exercises and the practice mediations, you have got more than 40 hours invested. And I think you can calculate all of those and begin to use that to position yourself as an expert and to condition your parties in terms of a reliable person that they can trust. Expressing confidence in the parties and in the process. So there's an example of this in one of the video clips. You want to keep the mood positive. Hope, chance for success, enhance positive emotions, reduce negative emotions, especially anger or distress. So we're now, we're mindful of this through the whole mediation. We want to be careful that we allow venting of those negative emotions, but at the same time, we're hoping that once we create that opportunity, usually in caucus, depending on the nature of the emotion, then parties are going to be able to move in a different direction. And you can keep the mood positive, especially beginning and opening orientation, by extolling the benefits of mediation, the likelihood of settlement based on data on settlement rates. And you'll remember that in the first class, I think it was, of Module 4, I gave you some of that data out of Virginia. And you might want to do some research to see if any of your state agencies are reporting the the results of their own evaluation form, assuming they have one. But there are places where you can find this data and use it to do this sort of conditioning. High party satisfaction rates. So you remember that the satisfaction rates in Virginia was 90% or more. And high level of compliance with mediated settlement agreements. Now, I don't know that there's a lot of data on this. I can't remember seeing it, but one of the things you can do is just say that because the agreement reflects the true interests and needs of the parties tend to want to comply with it. Other ways to keep the mood positive: use appropriate humor, gentle, non-malicious teasing of a party, lawyer, or at the mediator's own expense. They show a video clip where the mediator is teasing one of the lawyers whom he knows. I still think it's a little risky. It's easier to do it at your own expense and be the scapegoat or whatever than to be teasing somebody, because you never know exactly how somebody's going to take it. Good if parties can share a laugh together. It underlines their shared humanity. And one of the things that I always love is I do want somebody to cry in the beginning, because there's an old adage in mediation that nothing happens until somebody cries. But in the option generation stage, if they start laughing, I know we're in great shape. We're gonna do a great thing. And sometimes it's because they're throwing up silly options. And fine, let's get them down. All right, so generating movement. The authors have this notion of a progressive model. So they prefer participant persuasion to mediator influence. So this soft sell generating lasting change, and a continuum of approaches that move in that direction. So let's see what we've got. So persuasion based on empathy using role reversal, persuasion through healing using apology, persuasion by appealing to interests, problem solving, and finally persuasion through doubt, providing feedback and evaluation. Now, I've set this up as a separate webinar. It'll be part 2 to this class, because it really is a very distinct topic. I wanted the people who are going to be doing a more evaluative style to be able to go directly to that class and get a little more structure and information about how to do this in a way that reflects best practice and the ethical guidelines that apply to us. Okay, so let's first talk about role reversal and trying to establish empathy. So as we talked about in Module 3, one of the things that we're trying to do is getting people to stand in the other person's shoes. So to at least temporarily put aside their own perspective, see the issue the way the other side sees it, and articulate that other perspective. So it's this idea, as I mentioned in last class, of putting all that stuff in the middle and just being able to have everybody see it and begin to understand it and begin to acknowledge and appreciate it. Not necessarily agree, but just see it. So when you're doing role reversal, there are several possible interventions. So you first might ask the party to consider how their own past statements and actions may have been understood or misunderstood by the other side. You could ask them to consider how the other party's past actions might have a different or more innocent explanation. So here we're counteracting the attribution bias. And remember, I talked about the late husband. You can ask them to better appreciate each other's arguments, and you can ask them to consider how a party's own bargaining proposals might affect or be viewed by the other side. And there are examples at page 238 if you want to see specific implementation of this advice. The role reversal will help people recognize the legitimate perspectives of the other side and involves a progression of mediator directiveness. So you might start out with a little more open-ended, elicitive style, and then maybe become a little more forceful in the kind of feedback that you're giving. It might even be something where you're saying, isn't it possible that the other side, something like that. Challenges of doing this, party resistance. First of all, we don't do it very often, and so we're not very good at it. I don't use it very much, I'll be honest with you. I don't know. I just haven't had to use it, I guess. People have a limited ability to empathize when they're stuck in their own story. They may be blinded by the disagreement, and they may refuse to do it for strategic reasons. So in a litigated case, there's always resistance to recognizing that the other side's position has any legitimacy at all. It may require the mediator to prepare the party for the opportunity, and you usually have to do it in caucus, or you may have to do the whole role reversal discussion in caucus, because it's requiring them to make some concessions that they may not want to make in front of the other party. There is the video clip featuring the child custody dispute, and the authors suggest that you watch Bob struggle as he tries to adopt the mother's perspective, even for a few minutes, reverting to his own perspective after each word of praise for her. So, one step forward, two steps back. All right, so the next approach is persuasion through healing and the use of apology. So this can result in a more holistic resolution of the dispute, either an apology for a certain something or the acknowledgement of the emotional, interpersonal, or psychic harms experienced by the other person. And this can create real healing if it is a real apology. I'll talk about that next. So the mediator must clearly identify the injury needing attention, because you want it to be a specific apology, not something generalized, because there's just not enough guts to it to be effective. You want to encourage emotional expression so that the intangible harms find expression, and you want to help the wrongdoer hear how the victim feels. So you're going to be doing a lot of this through paraphrasing, right? The challenges. First of all, you're going to be dealing with shame or guilt by one or both parties. Parties are inexperienced at giving apologies, especially in our culture. There is a gender gap here. Women apologize a lot, but they do it to maintain relationships, not really to admit fault. Men have a really hard time apologizing because in our culture, it tends to make them one down. That it's often viewed as a sign of weakness, and that's kind of obvious, I guess. In the disputes that we're handling, both parties may feel victimized, so you may have to have some sort of mutual apology. And then there are strategic and evidentiary barriers. So in a litigated case, there are a lot of states that don't accept apologies from the evidentiary rule that allows statement of responsibility in as an admission against the parties. So a lot of states, especially ones that are trying to support mediation, have created specific rules allowing apology and not making them admissions of liability. All right, so what are the challenges of this approach? Well, there are really bad apologies, some that look for a safe or partial apology, one that doesn't acknowledge responsibility, and then an apology that basically says, I'm sorry, but, and there's a justification that follows. And there's a number of examples that you can look at to make the distinction. And at the bottom, all of them lack any real contrition or real acceptance of responsibility for the thing that they're apologizing, or for the harm that they may have caused. Okay, to be effective, the apology has to be sincere. And it's better accepted if it's spontaneous rather than requested. Now, in mediation, I will sometimes ask someone if they could apologize for something. And, you know, I'm almost always, I'm going to do that when I expect that they probably will say yes. But I can initiate the apology. I'm not going to tell them what necessarily to say, but I'm going to help them initiate it. And the apology has to seek nothing in return. So it can't have a quid pro quo attached to it. It has to contain an acknowledgement of the wrongful act and its impact on the victim. It has to accept responsibility. And if applicable, it should include a promise to refrain from such conduct in the future. And it should offer compensation for any tangible loss as well. So you can see why this can be challenging. It's got a lot of components and each one is really important. So effective apologies are complete and unconditional. So how do you orchestrate apologies? Well, you do it in caucus to explore whether a party has regrets about their own contribution to the dispute and whether they are willing to share those regrets. And if there's resistance, you can use it as an opportunity to explore interests behind the resistance. So you're going to engage in more why questions. And you can use role reversal. Well, what do you think would happen if you gave this apology? How would the other side likely receive it? What might happen if you were able to apologize for this particular thing? Coach about the elements of a good apology, and then give them a chance to role play and practice. Research shows that an apology allows the wrongdoer to reclaim a sense of self-respect, and this is because you get back on balance. You are now a good person, right? And they may feel the shame they need to feel to deter that person from future wrongdoing. So it has a healing, restorative, settlement promoting value. So let me give you an example of how Ken Cloak does this, and I love this and I've used this before. So let's say a party has given an apology, or I've asked them whether they would feel comfortable giving an apology, and then they give the apology, and you can watch the other person and see if they've hit the target, see if it's a good apology. And if you get feedback, and it's usually nonverbal, that this thing stinks, then you can turn to the party on the receiving end and you can say, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being a really lousy apology and 10 being the perfect apology, how would you rate that apology? And then they'll give you a number, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. And then you can say, what does the other person need to say to be able to get a 10 or an 8 or a 9 on that apology scale? And then they'll tell the person what fell short. And then you can turn to the first person and you can say, how do you feel about trying again? And they'll say, almost always, yeah, I can try again. So then they'll try again. Then you turn to the second party and you say, how did that one rate? And then maybe they'll bump it up a notch or 2. Or maybe it's perfect. And then you can move on. But then you can give, if it's you know, still a 6 or 7, then you can give the person a third crack at it after they've gotten feedback about why it fell short, and then give them another chance. And usually by the third time, they're pretty close to having an 8, 9, or 10. And that's, to me, pretty darn good. And usually the person on the receiving end will accept it at that point, if it's in that range. Okay, One of the advantages of this is that it may reduce the risk of rejection because the apologizing party gets feedback and a chance to do better. So, you could either role play in caucus before they go out, or you could even add this on, but you can also just do it in front of them. And, one of the things that I found is that people will tend to kind of get lighter about it. They may joke or start to laugh about it because it really is a bridge building exercise. And there's a certain amount of humility, I think, that goes on with somebody earnestly trying to do a really good apology and acknowledging that it's harder than it looks. And the mediator, supporting them as they go through this and acknowledging that it's harder than it looks. Okay, then shifting to persuasion by appealing to interest and problem solving. So here it's an attempt to reconcile shared and dovetailing interests before focusing on zero-sum interests. Must get the interests and needs on the table through transparency by the parties and probing by the mediator. So this, we've talked a lot about this before. This is nothing new. It's just being recognized as a category of persuasion. May require a brainstorming session. So now you can see how option generation fits in, because in this model we're really focused on interest, which means that we're probably going to be engaging in the brainstorming session as part of this persuasive process. May require creative thinking by the mediator, who can then suggest options. And I want to caution you, again, if it's consistent with your code of ethics. Now, here's the problem. There are limits to this. It can only address a part of the problem, which is that focus on interest. And if you'll remember back in those my style grids, I had, I think it was 4 columns. One was, what's the first one? I can't remember now. It's the definition, problem definition. And then the next one was depth of intervention, and then the next one was ADR process, and the last one was whether it was directive or elicitive. Well, let me talk about this a little bit more. Again, this comes out of Cloak's work, and he talks about there are different levels of intervention. At the body level, all we're trying to do is keep the parties from hurting each other. And it tends to be a very superficial intervention. And the ADR processes that are really kind of, limited to this are trial and arbitration. So you're resolving the outcome. People aren't having to beat each other up to resolve it, but it's just not going very deeply. The next level of intervention would be at the mind level. And here, this is where we really are talking about interest, because this is, this is up in your head. This is prefrontal cortex work for the most part. It's very rational mind work, left brain work for the most part. Not to say that some interests can't be defined in terms of other things, but it's just more up in the head. And then as we move deeper into a heart level intervention, we're going to be talking about emotions and psychological needs and those softer things that can come in and really influence the way someone's thinking about the conflict. And then the last one is a very deep intervention at the spirit level, where we're talking about a full reconciliation, or at least a unilateral forgiveness of the other person. So if we're only dealing with interests, we're up here, and potentially we're missing the deeper aspects of the dispute and the deeper opportunities for a much more complete resolution. So that's one problem with focusing just on interest-based problem solving. The other thing is, you'll remember that interests are only one sources of conflict, and that there are other sources, data, relationship, value, and structural, that this approach is not really going to focus on. And it also doesn't tend to focus on the distributive aspects of the negotiation, where instead of just expanding the pie through interest identification, you're now actually splitting up the pie. All right, in the next webinar, I'm going to be talking about persuasion through feedback and evaluation. So, I'll see you in just a bit.